Welcome everyone to our webinar today, Supporting School Reentry with SEL. I am thrilled to be here. Again, my name is Jennifer Sanderlin. I'm a Senior Education Partnerships Manager with Committee for Children. I work with schools and districts to help adopt social emotional learning programming, bullying prevention, child abuse prevention, and out of school time resources for schools and districts. So I have the great pleasure of working with today's presenter, Matt Piersall, who is going to introduce himself and get started here right now. Hi, Matt.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really thrilled and excited to get a chance to kind of share with you both some general kind of best practices around what we may be doing when we start school in the fall, as well as the resources that Committee for Children is putting together to help support you in the work that you're going to be doing. Just a little bit about myself. So, like I said, my name is Matt Piersall. I am the Community Manager at Committee for Children. I am also the Project Manager for our COVID-19 response. So, as we're going through this, I also encourage you all to think about if there are things that you would need from Committee for Children to make your work, to support you in your work. If you're not seeing it here, if you've got ideas, please put them in the chat box because we listen to that. I'm the person that gathers that information, so you're getting it right to the person that needs to hear it today. And your input really helps influence the work that we're doing. Much of the stuff that you're going to see me talking about during this presentation is derived directly from feedback that we got from people just like you, from educators in the field. So today we're going to be getting started, kind of going through a bunch of different things. The first things we're going to do is kind of talk about what are some of the issues facing students and staff coming back to school. We're going to then from there talk about general strategies for supporting those students. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about addressing racism in the context of social emotional learning. And then finally, I'm going to finish up with going through all the resources that we currently have or are in production, along with when you can expect those to be available to help you with planning for the new school year. So the first section, the effects of this crisis on students. So we know that even before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, back when things were normal, back in January, February, that there was a significant number of our students were dealing with childhood adversity. This is what you would have seen before. 25% of young children in America were living in poverty. Then that's even worse for minority children from disadvantaged backgrounds and underserved communities. And this has only gotten worse. By now, with the unemployment rate still at record highs and job losses due to the pandemic, we know the situation is worse. We can assume that currently the numbers are much higher. We don't really have great numbers on it yet, but as they emerge, I think that we will see that significantly more students are dealing with poverty and adversity in their lives. And in other ways, the pandemic and other crises that are striking this country are affecting students. Fear, anxiety, loss of income, food insecurity, social isolation. These all are things that lead to an increase in family stress. And while the precautions that we're taking to stay healthy during the COVID-19 pandemic are helping to keep us healthy from COVID-19, the increased time spent at home isn't always safe for everybody. For a number of our students, the increased stress at home can lead to a rising number of child abuse cases. And for students who were already in unsafe living situations outside of school, they've now been spending a lot more time in those unsafe situations. And also, due to school closings, children have an increased presence online, which has put them at greater risk for online bullying and abuse. And finally, they've had this loss of friends and family through illness or isolation. So, kids, they're not able to connect, their family connections have been severed, family members may be ill, or maybe even have family who has passed away due to COVID-19, plus the networks that they would have to support each other through friends have been totally cut off often by the closing of schools or severely reduced. What were once, close relationships are turned into Zoom play dates and text messaging, which is not the same for kids. And all of this kind of damages the sense of safety and have the potential to be very traumatizing for children and increasing the rates of traumatic stress. And ultimately, all of these can also be traumatizing for the adult caregivers themselves who are taking care of our students, and can be triggering for them who have had ACEs in their own lives. So there's a lot of different things going on that are kind of leading essentially to a buildup of traumatic stress and potential trauma for students in their homes. So, and as we think about this and think about what the role that school plays for students, school is not just a place for academics for students, especially for students who have unstable or unsafe lives outside of school. School is a community. It's a community that many students rely on, and this has been disrupted by school closures. The loss of this community impacts all students, but its effects are hardest on those who are in the least stable communities outside of school. And it's not just students that are going to need extra support. Staff have lost their community too, that work community that they were connected to. They may also have experienced stress and trauma. I think as many of us kind of reflect on what's happened over the last 4 months, many of us can identify lots of stress that have impacted our own lives. And so as we prepare to reopen schools, we're very mindful of our colleagues and their well-being, and our own well-being as well. Because no educator can support their students if they are not themselves supported. It's really, really critical to kind of make sure that the whole school community is receiving support. And this can seem like a really daunting task. So all students, especially the most vulnerable students, are going to need extra support coming back into this new school year. And the staff need extra support too, on top of all of the planning that's being done, because school is going to look and be completely different just in like a structural sense. So it's a really, really daunting task. But that's the next part of this session, is going to be talking about what are some concrete things that you can do. Things that are practical, things that can fit into the larger planning for reopening in a hybrid learning or remote learning or whatever kind of shape your school or district is going to be in as you reopen. So these are the three things we're going to kind of cover. We're going to focus really on this idea of as students and staff come back into school, one of the most critical things to do, and one of the most critical things that social emotional learning can play a direct role in supporting, is rebuilding that community, rebuilding that safe and supportive environment in schools from the very beginning. So we're going to kind of look at that from these three different angles. So the first thing we want to talk about is rebuilding trusting relationships. For many students, it's going to be difficult to simply pick up where things left off in March. You'll need to be very intentional about how you rebuild student-staff relationships. It's not just going to be the same, because it's not. School's going to look very different. Students have experienced a lot of different things. Plus, they've had this really extended time where they've been disconnected from school to one degree or another, and it needs to be acknowledged. So how do we go about rebuilding trusting relationships? Well, I think one of the most powerful things that educators can do is to make sure that every student has a caring adult that is checking in with them to one extent or another every day. Rain or shine, in person or online, make sure that every student is getting checked in on. And these check-ins don't have to be extensive. They don't have to be long. They can be short. You can do them in sort of a group setting as well, if you have like an advisory or a class meeting time during the day, where you can check in with everybody in a little bit, and at that point kind of identify students that may need an additional check-in and more attention given to them and their needs down the road. And so as you're thinking about doing this, they can be short, they can be simple. We have check-ins that are in our middle school program right now that can be adapted. And I'm going to kind of let you know as we go in that we're actually working on an adapted version of that will be available so that you don't need to do the adaptation yourself. We're going to have an adapted version of our middle school check-ins and a version of check-ins for use in elementary schools as well that we're working on. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But they can be short. And something I think to be aware of is that as you do this is not a quick fix. Be ready for pushback, indifference, or being ignored by students. The trust has been broken between just has because of the way that school is closed and the way that the kind of students' lives have been upended. We need to kind of start from a place of rebuilding relationships. And so there'll be a lot of students that'll take time for them to trust that we are actually really in this to take care of them and support them. And so be ready for that and be aware of it and don't give up. And also, I think for schools that are 100% online, to be really aware of those students that that are not showing up at all. I mean, this is not great data. The common anecdotal number that I hear is about 50% of students generally are not in any way engaged with online learning at all in the spring. And if you're 100% online, think about the number of students you're reaching. Think about the number of students you're checking in on, and how can you check in on those students that you're not seeing? Because it may be that doing it online and digitally is not possible, and it may be there may need to be a lot of work, maybe need to be groundwork done to make sure that adult is able to check in with that student every day, and it may take time before you get a response, but don't give up on them. So, in addition to kind of creating time for those check-ins to establish student-staff relationships, there's also, I think it's really important to set aside time for reflection. Research suggests that giving students time to come together and talk about how their lives have changed due to crisis can help them cope with the stress and trauma caused by that crisis. This is, core social emotional learning right here. Students talking about identifying emotions, reflecting on how on their effects on their lives. And many students kind of lack a space where they can do that in a way where they will feel safe sharing that. That's not necessarily something that students can count on being able to do at home. So being able to do that at school and being able to see their peers also doing it and recognize that their peers are experiencing similar emotions to them and are having similar experiences to them, which normalizes the feelings that they are having, is incredibly powerful. And again, this doesn't have to be super complicated. We just need to create time and space with a little bit of structure. And say, well, what is that structure supposed to be? Well, when I get into the direct supports that we're providing, you'll see that we'll be kind of showing some of the ways that we'll be helping you with kind of building out that structure so that you can have successful reflection time for students. And then finally, one thing I want to talk about establishing trusting relationships is also to be okay with unstructured time. Students need the opportunity to rebuild their relationships with their peers. And providing time for unstructured kind of interactions is really important. This is true for all ages, but it's especially true for adolescents who are really kind of keyed in and dependent on their peer relationships. And this goes for whether you're doing hybrid learning or 100% distance learning. I think there's a big temptation when students are only in school half the time to make that half the time. We got to be doing a lot of work, and there's real pressures for that because of academic loss that students have experienced because of extended school closures. But for students to be able to succeed in schools academically, they need to be able to connect and engage with school. And for that to be there, their social connections and their feeling of safety and support at school is critical. And so think about unstructured time. Think about how you can make that happen within the confines of social distancing, if you're hybrid, or if you are doing online learning. How do you create safe spaces for students to be kids? So another one is as we try to rebuild the school community, is to reinforce the value of the school community to students. And one of the ways to do that, I think, is a social belonging. This is evidence-based intervention. It's an evidence-based strategy that seeks to build or rebuild critical social connections within a school. The wonderful thing about these social belonging interventions is that they're super practical. It's something called it's part of a family of interventions called WISE interventions, because they don't rely on repetition and continual reinforcement. They rely on kind of giving children the right thing to think about at the right moment, to sort of kind of flip a switch as they're thinking. This is growth mindset as an example of this, where you try to get kids to kind of switch to growth mindset. It's not about talking about it all the time. It's about at the right moment kind of suggesting something to a student that helps them reframe the way they think about, in this case, school and their own worries about school. They don't take much time. They can be done by anybody. Social belonging interventions are integral to our middle school program. If you're familiar with our middle school program, they're the first lesson in grade 6. And we're also creating adapted versions of this for middle school that are specific to coming back after pandemic-related closures. But there's nothing super secret about social belonging interventions. If you're looking for more information on what it means to do social belonging, I highly recommend this free online kind of course. Doesn't take too long to go through. MindsetKit.org is out of Stanford. They do really high quality work, and their social belonging kind of they call it a course. It doesn't take longer than 20 minutes to go through. that for educators is incredibly valuable to kind of give you an idea of how you can build your own social belonging interventions if you're not going to use the ones that we are creating. And then lastly, to touch on supporting staff. All the stuff that we've been talking about here for students can apply to staff too. Check-ins. Make sure that staff are able to check in with each other. Staff is checking in that every staff member is being acknowledged every day by somebody else. Check in on them, make sure they're doing okay. Some sort of thing, just to let them know somebody else is out there that is concerned about them and cares about them. This may just involve setting aside a small amount of time to connect. This could be something more formal along the lines of a PLC, but without an explicit focus on teaching practice, where educators can connect in a more informal way and just kind of think about the stuff that's affecting them. Along those lines, providing time for staff to reflect is important so they can process how the crisis affected them too. And I think as we think about how this would look like for staff, this doesn't have to be all about the things that have been negative, because there are some silver linings out there that are worth identifying. For example, and I kind of draw this from my wife is a middle school teacher, so one of the things that's kind of for her has come out of the sudden shift to online learning, which was generally very stressful and difficult, was that she actually had more time to collaborate with staff. She spent more time working with her colleagues to co-teach and co-plan than she ever had time to do before. And so that was a silver lining. And it's like, because it's something to reflect and say, how can we build on this and sustain it moving forward? And finally, there's power in unstructured time for staff too. You see this a lot in the business world around online learning, about setting aside specific times for staff to, the virtual happy hour, essentially, or the virtual lunch, where everyone gets together and there's no pressure or anything. You're just being colleagues, trying to maintain that staff colleague community. And then finally, that social belonging intervention I was talking about, which helps kind of rebuild the threads of community, that was originally developed for adults. It was originally developed for students in college, for people in their 20s. So it is applicable. The central tenets of it apply to adults just as much as they do to kids. And so consider looking at how you can take elements of that and integrate it into back to school stuff that you're doing to support your staff. So the last thing to kind of leave as we talk about this particular section is to think about the time. And this is something I really encourage you all to think about, how you're going to allocate your time. If you're in a hybrid environment and you're going to have a limited amount of in-person time, how are you going to allocate it? Online time, of course, there's very little time. Functionally, it's very hard to get a lot of student attention in an online environment. How are we going to allocate our time? And I'd say right now that this is the time to really put social emotional learning front and center. Because if not now, when? And there's going to be many barriers. There's going to be expectations to focus on academics, and rightly so. There's going to be expectations to focus on academics because a lot of kids are going to be coming back very behind and struggling, and that needs to be addressed. There's also going to be budget constraints on this. Many states are cutting budgets now. Others are going to be cutting budgets in soon, and that's going to hit many schools. And finally, as always comes up around social emotional learning work, there's going to be staff misgivings because staff are unfamiliar with this. They're maybe uncomfortable. It's not something they're trained in. And these are all things that we always face. But I feel like this is the moment when we can really look to come up with answers to those, address them in a very proactive way. Because this is the moment to promote SEL. With all the trauma and dislocation and stress that staff and students, everybody in the school is experiencing, this is the time for social emotional learning. You are all on this because you already believe that. You are SEL champions already. That's why you're here. But hopefully kind of some of the information that you just got in this section of the presentation provides you with the ways to kind of go and address these concerns that will come up so that you can seize this moment to really not just support people in the moment, but think about how you can build an even better school. The changes that we're talking about here, this focus on social emotional learning, this focus on community building, can last beyond this crisis. It doesn't have to be just a moment in time. There can be lasting benefits for students that come out of this. And think about how you can lead with SEL, not just now, but in the future. How can you build a successful community, a safe and supportive community, and really center community in your schools, and to promote the social emotional well-being of your students first, so that they can then be more successful and more ready to perform academically and be more socially successful. There's also another whole kind of bent that you can take to this is to reflect back on how successful online learning was in the spring. And as you continue to do online learning, whether it's in a hybrid model or an all online learning model, how successful will it be in the future? And we can kind of look at a whole other sort of element of social emotional learning. I think the crisis has shown that how many of our students were ill prepared for independent online education. And it really highlights the need for social emotional learning skills like goal setting, being able to proactively ask for help, being able to self-manage and problem solve independently. And those are all critical skills for online learning. They're the kind of skills that often when students are in school, they have a lot of support structures that are right there from teachers and counselors and other support staff in a building. When that's all taken away and they're working independently at home, the need for those skills is really highlighted. And so that's another whole kind of element of when we think about centering social emotional learning in a school. It's not just about community building. It's not just about reflecting and managing on emotions. It's also about building the skills for being a successful online learner so that as we prepare, as I think I'm looking at it, online learning is here to stay in some form or another. We need to really be preparing students to succeed in that so that 50% of students that aren't participating drops. Because as online learning is here to stay, for better or for worse, students need to be prepared for that. And social emotional learning is a place to start for preparing them to be successful in online learning. One last thing I want to leave you with as we talk about kind of building a better school and think about it is I want to take a moment to talk about high-stakes testing and to kind of reflect a second on what high-stakes testing means for students. Does the testing and prep that surrounds that testing help students feel safe and supported? Or does it serve to alienate students, especially at-risk students? And how many of those students have been engaged with online learning over the spring? And how will a continued emphasis on testing affect those students moving forward? And really, is this the moment for that? For many of us, this is out of our hands. But some of us, it is very much in our hands to kind of talk about where are we centering standardized testing in this year? Are the effects of standardized testing on students who are marginalized, students who are struggling, students who are already kind of disconnected and alienated from school, is that worth it right now? And are those effects worth it moving forward as we think about how we can reimagine school coming out of this crisis? And then the same thing applies to staff because this is the way that standardized testing affects students. It also often affects staff. And is the effects of that on staff social emotional well-being worth it right now? Is it worth it moving forward? I don't know the answer to that. That's not my, I have my opinion, obviously. But I think we just need to really reflect very thoughtfully on what the role standardized tests are going to play this year and in years moving forward. So one last thing, I'm sure this is pretty obvious to a lot of people, is that the next year we need to prepare for more school closures. We may open up in the fall, hybrid, and then have to close down again. This is something we're just going to need to be ready for. Even past the COVID-19 crisis itself, there will always be a need for this to be something that schools and districts are prepared for. As you're preparing for this, make sure to include students and families in that planning. Because part of the shock and trauma that came from what happened in March was that students and families were caught completely unaware. And that's perfectly understandable because everybody was caught completely unaware. And nobody should feel bad about any of this. Everybody did amazing work in incredibly difficult circumstances in the spring to do just a Herculean effort on part of educators across the country and around the world to meet students' needs. So I don't say this as a reflection on what happened in the past, because what happened in the past was amazing and awesome and 10 million times better than anybody could have expected in the circumstances. But looking forward, to just treat it like a fire drill. We just got to be ready, and everybody knows what to do so that students are prepared, and it's not as traumatic of an experience should it ever happen again. So I want to take a moment to talk about addressing racism, because the COVID-19 pandemic is not the only crisis that has gripped our country at this moment. We need to kind of recognize the full extent of what has taken place over the last few months. It's not just the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not just school closures. It's not just the massive economic effects on the families of our students. We've also had the murder of George Floyd, which brought to the fore and prominence issues of systemic racism, which many of our students and their families have been dealing with for a long time, long before this spring. but it has come to the fore. It's become a point of major conversation, and with protests around the country, and a real, no matter how present this is in the lives of students, whether it's new to them or no great surprise to them, the spotlight put on it in itself really elevates this for a lot of students. And we can't pick which crisis we're going to address when students come back this fall. We need to address everything that's happened. If we talk about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and school closures without talking about the effects of systemic racism and the conversations and events that have come out of the murder of George Floyd, then we risk alienating our students who will see that disconnect, who will notice that we are choosing to talk about one crisis without the other. So we just need to be really ready to talk about that. So that's also a giant, huge thing. And how are we going to do that? I'm going to come out right now and say that I am not an expert on anti-racism education and anti-racism pedagogy. Committee for Children, we're working very hard to build that capacity within an organization, but we are not there yet. We are not an anti-racism organization yet. So at this moment, I recommend these 3 resources as great places to go for a lot of resources that are really timely, meet the needs of students and staff today, and are also very turnkey. These are not organizations that put out high-level things that ultimately require hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of time to translate into something that actually can work in a classroom. Teaching Tolerance and Facing History have full anti-racism curricula that are free, that you can grab right off there, that go right there and see it, and an amazing number of resources, including lesson plans that you can pull and use right now. Highly recommend their resources. Greater Good Science Center has a lot of great resources that are aimed more at educators. So look to that. Be aware that it's a thing that we need to, it's part of the trauma. It's part of the stress that students are bringing with them as they come back, and staff are bringing with them as they come back to school. All right, so right on time, we get to the final part of this presentation where I'm going to talk about, so I've told you all the stuff that you need to do, or should do, or want to do, and that's all well and good. But there's no time to make it happen, and there's a million other things that are going on, so how to make this stuff happen. And so this is the part of the presentation where I'm going to go through what we at Committee for Children have or are working on to provide to y'all. And I'm going to try to give you dates for things that aren't out yet. I'm going to try to give you dates, guesstimate dates when they will be available, to help you plan for your own back-to-school work, for what you're going to be doing with your staff and what you're going to be doing with your students. So the first thing we're releasing, and these should be coming out August 1st, are separate remote and hybrid learning guides. So way back in March, at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we released guidelines on how to adapt second step in social emotional learning for online learning. And since then, we've learned a lot about what successful adaptation looks like in these environments. We've had the chance to observe second step lessons being taught remotely. We've gotten a lot of feedback from clients, and we've also had a chance to learn just more broadly around best practices and things like that have emerged for how remote learning should look, and kind of consequently how hybrid learning might look. So we've taken that old guide from March down and we're revising it. And what these are going to look like when you get them, we'll have 2 different PowerPoints. If any of you have used our orientation PowerPoints for our different programs, they're kind of along the same lines as that, but they're going to be a lot shorter. It's a PowerPoint with detailed information in the notes section, and you can click through it yourself, and you can use it just like any old guide and kind of learn the information that's in it and watch the embedded videos that will be in it. But you can also take those PowerPoints and you can modify them for your own needs and use them and share them with colleagues and integrate them into overall back-to-school planning processes so that you can share this with your staff and colleagues however works best. And I can give you a little bit of a sneak peek of some of the stuff that's going to be coming up, some of the learnings that we got. So if you're going to be doing remote learning for social emotional learning and doing remote second step, doing it online, one of the key things we've learned is that activities really need to be broken up, and the amount of teacher-led talking needs to be limited to as much extent as possible. The most successful adaptations of second step that we saw had teachers creating short, like 2-minute short videos introducing a concept, kind of distilled down from a lesson, and then providing a space for students to reflect and talk about that concept. And the most successful ones were done asynchronously, so they weren't like a live lesson. They were done where there was a video that was posted and students had sort of like a bulletin board or a discussion space where they could talk, like in Google Classroom or a Flipgrid where they could go to and share their thoughts, so that students had space to respond authentically. And we can talk about this in a couple different places. In some of those things, when you see when kids are doing them, you have that asynchronous, that chance for students to respond asynchronously, where they can watch it, when they can, and they can respond to it when they can. You actually get some really thoughtful reflection from students that you may not necessarily hear of. When you remove that pressure of having to respond in the moment, in the classroom, right then and there, raise your hand, answer the question right now, students are able to kind of give a thoughtful answer. Students that may be reluctant to speak up in class or who need more time to process than is available in an in-person lesson, all of a sudden have that time. And you can see, it can actually be really inspiring to see some of the stuff that come out of an asynchronous lesson. So that's one learning, and you'll get more information on that about what it means to do asynchronous and things like that in the guide. And also another is to not get too fancy, because there's a lot of reasons why students are unable to participate in online learning. And so the simpler and lower phi you make your online learning, the more students will be able to participate in it. Students may have internet access, but they may be on a phone, and that phone may belong to a family member who's at work. So, think about that. That student who can only access what's going on a phone when their family is home, or who's sharing a computer, who has poor internet, or has a computer but needs to wait till their cousin is there who knows how to run the computer and can make it work. There's a lot of reasons. So the simpler you make things, the more students can participate. And as far as hybrid, what we really say is that SEL really needs to be time carved out in that limited amount of in-person time for social emotional learning. And community building is really going to be key. Another thing that we've looked at and seeing, if you look at schools that have opened up so far, like you look in Europe and in Asia where schools already reopened, that small group and pair activities are going to have to either be individual or whole class activities. When students have to be 6 feet apart from each other at all times and can't touch and share materials, it's either going to be working by yourself or working as a whole class. So those are some of the adaptations we'll be talking about in more depth in these guides. Another thing we are creating, this is to support schools that are in a hybrid model. We're going to be creating community rebuilding units. These are going to be new units for second step, for kindergarten through 8th grade, that contain 4 to 6, actually probably going to be right in the middle. It's probably going to be 5 weeks of lessons that schools can do as soon as students come back in person, whenever that is. If you're opening up at the beginning of the school year in person for at least part-time, or if you're not opening up in person until December or March or next year, you don't open up at all this year. Whenever that is that students walk back in the door, these units will be ready and will be something that you can pick up and use right then to kickstart that community rebuilding process. They are, for those of you who are familiar with our child protection unit and our bullying protection unit, in spirit, they're like the same. It's another snap-on amount of lessons that you'd use alongside core second step. I do want to level set. They are not going to be the media-rich lessons that you are used to from second step. They're very simple. And they reflect we are putting these together as fast as we can to meet your needs. And so they're going to be more traditional lessons, where you're getting the lesson comes on a PDF, and it's a lot of kind of activity instructions and kind of conversation prompts. But
hey, Matt.
Yeah.
While you are here talking about this, I just wanted to alert you to a few questions. Thought it might be just nice to take care of while we're here on this slide, because I'm getting quite a few. So
okay.
That's okay. I knew it would be a popular topic, so it's good. People are asking, what will this unit be called? And
Community Rebuilding Unit.
Community Rebuilding Unit. Okay. Will these new lessons be included in the alternative scope and sequence, or will that be something separate?
They will be, but not in like a do this. I mean, they'll be present in that alternative scope and sequence, but like I said, it really depends on when students show back up in your school. If you don't have students showing up, so again, kind of turn back, for example, my wife's district. They're going to be their current plan is to open the elementary schools at the beginning of the school year, but the middle schools aren't going to open for in-person instruction until December. So this unit is designed for when those doors open back up again to start doing it. So it'll be part of that alternative scope and sequence, but it's going to be sort of like kind of floating out there saying, do it at the beginning of the school year if you're open. But if you're not open, drop it in as soon as you open up.
Right. Okay. So it's really not meant for before. I guess that doesn't make sense. Let me look at this other question so I can read it and not talk at the same time.
It's not designed for remote learning. So if you're still teaching online, then we will have other resources for you. And I actually don't have a slide for that because we've just been working that out, but I can tell you what those are going to be. If you're still 100% online, then if you are a middle school, we created in the spring, in April, we created a guide to creating a remote advisory program, which covers a lot of similar territory around community building, but it's optimized for remote learning because remote learning is very, very different from in-person. And so the way things are structured and the way the activities are put together is different. And it takes a lot because remote learning can look a lot of different ways. There's a lot more kind of room for adaptation for your particular circumstances. So we have that, and we are updating that for middle school. And we're going to be creating another thing that's kind of inspired by that for K-5 that's going to be a remote classroom meeting guide that will have activities in it and guidance for doing classroom meetings online. So those will kind of provide support for community building in a way that is appropriate for remote learning. But once you open up those doors and as kids come back in, that's going to be when you really need to think about how do we reestablish that safe and supportive environment. This is going to be that's a huge transition for everybody involved. And in order to meet that need, that's what this community rebuilding unit is for.
Okay, so another question. I'm getting tons of questions about the cost.
This is the popular slide, huh?
Yeah,
okay.
No, the cost, and then also, will these be available to everyone or just Second Step program users?
Cost will be free. These will be available. All of the resources I'm going to share are going to be available to everybody. So this means that even if you are in a Second Step school, you could pick up this community rebuilding unit and you can use it. And they're going to be designed with that in mind, that you don't need, because they're not going to expect any prior Second Step knowledge. So, and additionally, if you have high school colleagues, I think that the middle school rebuilding guide we're creating will work in a high school environment as well. So it can be shared that way, and it'll be 100% free. As part of our COVID-19 support. Available from our COVID-19 support page, which I'm going to share the link to at the end of this presentation. It's kind of our warehouse for all things COVID-19.
Okay, just two more things.
Sure.
Would you also address what we might have available for pre-K?
So for pre-K, the remote and hybrid learning guides are going to be our pre-K. So the information in there will be just as useful for that. We have some existing supports for pre-K. One of the things that we are going to be doing if you're a pre-K and you're still in remote learning is that we will be making the lesson cards online. This goes EL5. We're going to be making our lessons heard loud and clear over the course of the last few months that our lessons need to be available online for educators to access. So for among other things that they can create their own online lessons. So we'll be doing that for early learning. We're not creating a rebuilding unit for early learning because we feel like the early learning program is already really all about, it has so much of that built into it that it doesn't require this kind of focus on community that our K-8 program does. So I feel like that with it and the amended scope and sequence that'll go with it, that'll be a great place to start. And you can start teaching early learning Second Step.
Okay, that makes sense. The last question then, and then I'll let you move on, is a question about if our class is split into two groups, should the rebuilding unit wait until the whole class is back together or the first day of in-person learning, even if it's just half the class?
So like you've got an A-B schedule and you've got half your students coming in one day and half your students coming in the other. I would recommend doing it with the half of the students that are there because for the immediate time, that's their community. And the unit's going to kind of focus in a certain amount more so. And as the kids get older, as we get into the middle school stuff, it's more directly focused on like reflecting and processing on the events that they've experienced. That's important work to do at the beginning. It's not just about building connections with peers. It's also about building connections with staff. It's about rebuilding that engagement with school. And that should start as soon as they walk in the door.
Okay, great. And will any of these activities, I lied, there's one more question. Will the community rebuilding unit address issues around racial justice?
It will not. It leaves room open for conversations around that. And certainly it's acknowledged that those conversations will come up. But like I was saying before, we don't have the expertise at the moment at Committee for Children to be able to do that work in an effective and meaningful way. And that's why I point you towards teaching tolerance and facing history who have the experience and the expertise and have put years and decades of effort into creating quality anti-racism resources for schools and say, look to them for that. I'm going to talk about, we are going to be creating something to kind of help you look to their work. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But, we at Second Step, Media Committee for Children, have a ways to go. We are on a journey ourselves to get to a point where we can be seen as a real leader in anti-racism work. And until we get to that point, I really encourage you to look at the people who've already done that work and build off what they've done.
Okay, great. Are these activities just 30 minutes or similarly to the other lessons?
Yeah,
All right.
they're similar to a lesson in structure and time. They'll be similar to a lesson. The way they work, you'll recognize it. It's just not, the elementary ones will be a little different because there's not pictures, there's not story and discussions. They're more traditional lessons, but they're meant to fit into the same time slot that you would put a regular second step lesson in. So if you budget that time at the beginning of the year for these, and then you continue on with regular second step lessons, that should work just fine.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Oh, it's the next slide. So like I was saying, I've been talking about teaching tolerance and facing history and Greater Good Science Center, and there's other organizations out there as well. We are working on, hoping to have available August 1st, a resource guide to kind of help make the connections between Second Step and the resources these other organizations have. And this will be ongoing work. So we will have something in early August, and we will continue to build on that as the year progresses. So this is definitely something that we want to make a focus and be able to create meaningful, support you all in doing this really difficult work. And so we're going to get started with this, and we're going to build on it, and you'll see additional supports rolling out as the year goes on. So we've been talking about students so far, but I also want to talk about, we have a really amazing thing that's coming in late August that's aimed specifically at supporting school staff. So as some of you may know, in January, we are launching a whole new program called Second Step Social Emotional Learning for Adults. And it's going to have a lot of different kind of content that is designed to support the social emotional learning needs of school staff. So we have actually, already in the spring, we released a very small chunk of that. There's something called the gratitude module, which we have on our COVID-19 support page right now, which is a very small gratitude practice that we released free as a sort of a field test for people to test out. Well, we're going to be ramping that up. We have a whole module, a large, I say large. We have a very, very, I'm very excited about this. A comprehensive training course for school staff on building resilience in the face of crisis and stress. And that module will be ready for field testing in end of August. And normally what we do at Committee for Children is we would go out and we'd find a couple, 3 or 4 schools, and we'd ask them if they would want to field test it for us, and we'd provide it to them, and they would provide us with feedback. Well, what we're going to do at late August, we're going to open up that field test to everybody, to anybody who wants to participate. So no matter where you are, what's your school, or if you're an individual person who wants to do it yourself, you will be able to register for the field test. You'll be able to access everything for free. And what we would ask in return is that you provide us feedback on it and help us make that module even better. You'll be part of the production of this program, and we will listen to your feedback and we'll integrate it into the final product. It's going to be available late August and be available for free through the end of December. I'll show you a little bit more information about it here. So there's going to be 3 units of adult-facing content: understanding self-care, caring for others, and then caring for students. And there will also be student-facing content included in that. So once an educator's completed Unit 3, then they will have access to a few. So I think it's 2 lessons per grade band. So K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and high school. There'll be a couple lessons specifically on how to help students build resilience in the face of crisis and stress. And those will be available to anybody who completes Unit 3. And so you see there's a link right there. That bit.ly link will take you to a sign-up page. If you sign up there, we will send you more information about registering for this module once it's available to be registered for. We're also going to be doing a webinar on it, I think, in an indeterminate time in the near future. So I'm super excited about this. We put a lot of time. This will be first of all, it'll be a great kind of preview of social emotional learning for adults. We put a lot of thought into what is not just what information school staff need, but also what is a way to present it that meets the needs of educators, recognizing the very limited amount of time that you all have for professional development. So there's a lot of not just research into building resilience in this, but also research into what is effective adult training look like? And it doesn't look like traditional professional development at all. These units are broken down into real short, little digestible, what we call micro learning. So I think you'll find it not just valuable content, but accessible content as well. And so yeah, sign up for more information, and we will get you more information as soon as this is available. Also, I want to let you know that Imagine Neighborhoods Season 2 is coming. So Imagine Neighborhoods is a social emotional learning podcast that we launched in the spring, designed for families with kids ages 4 to 9. This is a family resource. This is a thing that you can share with your students' families, provided they kind of fall in that age range. And it's a fantastic resource. It's gotten a lot of, just a ton of traction in the spring. We didn't plan on launching it right at the beginning of a major crisis, but we did, and it proved to be very timely and be one of the most popular downloaded podcasts for families on out there. Apple iTunes, it's kind of shooting up into top 10 lists and all sorts of things kind of showing, and our own feedback showing it's gotten incredible uptake. So season 1 is available right now. You can go binge listen to it with yourself or with kids, or share it with families. And there's topics that are generally aligned to Second Step. And then there's also topics that are specific to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so everything in Imagine Neighborhoods is research-based and aligned to Second Step concepts, and also kind of reflects research on what it looks like to educate kids through podcasts. And so everything there for season 1 is available. Season 2 is going to start mid-August, and it's going to focus on returning to school after COVID-19 related school closures. It's also going to directly address issues of systemic racism. And our team, the Imagine Neighborhoods team, has done a lot of work to bring in outside experts to inform how this podcast is going to address those, but they're going to address it head on. And so that content will be coming out in August through October. And then firstly, I want to let you know, we are also kind of boosting up our virtual professional development. We're really increasing the scope of our webinar content that we're going to be creating. You are in an example of that right now. We've got live webinars and on-demand webinars on a variety of topics. So we have a trauma-informed practice webinar that's available on demand right now. Jen, co-host today, she is going to be presenting that again tomorrow. So if you want to see it live, it's a fantastic presentation on how to integrate trauma-informed practices to support students during this crisis. We have a webinar on building remote advisory programs, a webinar on using online communities of practice to support educators during crisis. We have more stuff coming up. One schedule coming up soon is on child protection and bullying prevention staff trainings and how you can use that. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And we're going to have a lot more stuff coming out. So keep an eye on our webinars page. You see the link right there. We also send out emails every month on what webinars are coming up. That's how you might have gotten to this webinar. We're going to be doing a lot more stuff around direct professional development for educators. So, and I'm mentioning that webinar on bullying and trauma. Something I'm really excited about is that our all-staff training elements for Child Protection Unit and Bullying Prevention Unit are available free. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our Child Protection Unit and our Bullying Prevention Unit, in addition to the student-facing lessons, there's very comprehensive training that goes with those. As part of that training, there's something we call an all-staff training. It's called Module 2. And it is designed to be sort of a baseline training for everybody in a school building to help them kind of learn how to, in the case of the Bullying Prevention Unit training, how to recognize and respond to and report bullying effectively. And the Child Protection Unit one is how to recognize, respond to, and report signs of trauma and abuse. And because issues around cyberbullying, and then especially because we are concerned that there's going to be a big spike in students coming back, having experienced trauma, having experienced abuse and neglect over the course of extended school closures, that it's really important that staff be sort of ready, not just ready and willing to help students, because I feel like we're all ready and willing, but knowing what to do, because it's so difficult. Thinking back to my own time as a teacher, how it's so incredibly difficult to, in the moment, to be able to do what is needed to do to support a student. If you should see signs of abuse or neglect, or a student should report abuse or neglect to you. It's a critical moment in time, and that can any staff member in a building, not just teachers, not just counselors, not just administrators, any staff member in a building could find themselves in that situation where they have that moment where they have a chance to support a student who's experiencing abuse and neglect. And these trainings are designed to give educators, everybody in the school building, the tools and awareness needed to be able to handle that situation appropriately. Because one of the things about the research shows is that students will often report bullying or abuse once, and if they don't receive support from that one report, they may never ever report it again. So I'm really glad that we're able to provide these for free. And I'll provide links to them at the end of this. You'll see the direct links to where you can get to these trainings. Are also available from our COVID-19 support page. And again, all you need is the link. You don't need to log in to Second Step. You don't need to do anything through December 31st. Anybody able to take this training. And I will give you a little bit of warning. These are pulled out of a larger training that is available to people who purchase the Second Step, these programs. So there's a little things. Where is Module 1? Well, Module 1 is not, we're not providing that for free. It's for administrators, and it's super useful, but it's not the thing that doesn't really address this particular moment in time. Module 3 is how to teach those programs. So it's not really relevant to this particular thing. And you'll get to the end of this training and it'll say, hey, you keep going to get your certificate. Well, we're not offering certificates for these either because of the way they're pulled out. It still says that, but those aren't actually available. But the information and the content is there. It's research. It's evidence-based. Actually, I was about to stump myself there, but actually the Child Protection Unit, we have recent research that's showing the effectiveness of it. So it's actually some evidence-based stuff in there as well. It's all research-based. I highly recommend, if you've got the time, for your staff to take a look at it. They take about an hour each to take advantage of this while we've got them out for free. Also, I mentioned we've got our middle school remote advisory guide. Like I said, we're going to be updating that soon, and we're also going to be creating an elementary school version of it soon. So I already talked about it a little bit, so I won't get into it a little bit too much more, but that's available from our COVID-19 support page. I'll show you in a second. Oh, we're over time, so I'm going to go real quick. We got MindYeti. It's a mindfulness program that we have. We have 15 free things that are available for free now and forever. If you go to mindyeti.com, you will find links to getting it to YouTube and Vimeo and a lot of different platforms where you can access them. It's a fantastic mindfulness program. It's designed for elementary school, but we get a lot of people saying it's useful for older kids too. Looking to bring some mindfulness is a very appropriate thing to use right now to help support kids in trauma. It's also designed to be done that families can do it. It doesn't require any experience with mindfulness in order to facilitate. It's designed for an educator or a family member to learn to practice mindfulness and learn about it alongside students and children. So it's a great free resource that's available and will remain free forever. And finally, we have the Second Step support page. I've been talking about it for a while. Here's the link to it. This is the place where you can go to for latest information, updating people on all the resources that we got coming out. So I said we got resources that are coming out starting August 1st and will continue to come out over the course of August. And if you're ever curious if we've got new things, bookmark this page, go back and check it out. We'll always be updating stuff. And you also see a ton of stuff that we put out in the spring that's still available, like recordings of emotion management lessons, the additional activities for Imagine Neighborhoods that wrap around the Imagine Neighborhoods podcast, guidance for what you need to do to be recording your own, if you're recording your own content or using Second Step materials in your own recordings. There's copyright information there so that you know make sure what you're doing aligns with copyright needs. Lots of stuff there. So please feel free to check it out and come back often so you can see what's new. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about staying connected with us. There's a couple ways you can do that. One, we have a Facebook community. So this is sort of my day job, is to manage this community where you can connect with thousands of Second Step educators from across the country and around the world. And say that collectively, there are thousands of years of Second Step experience in this group. There's people that just know it backwards and forwards. There's people that are new to it. Please join this. We would love to have you there if you use Facebook. And you can get not only updates from us from what's going on, but you can connect with your fellow educators, learn from them, provide your own expertise too. You are all experts in the work that you do, and this is a chance for you to share your expertise with your peers and help support each other. And so please feel free to join. I'd love to see you there. And finally, as I said that don't be strangers. You can call us up at any time. Our client support staff is standing by live 6 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and always answering emails to answer your questions, big or small, about Second Step. And they're amazingly helpful and knowledgeable folk. So let us know what's going on. Email us. Give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. Here's that promised slide that has all the things. I apologize for running a few minutes over. If you want to stick around, I'm happy to answer questions for the next, if there's questions to answer.
There are. Thank you, Matt. And judging by the comments in the chat, I'm getting a lot of really great feedback, Matt, about all of these resources and webinars that you are on. So hopefully people will join us to hear more from Matt. So just a couple questions that I thought you could answer. Hopefully the people are still here. One is that she says, I'm wondering how we will implement all the lessons in the basic second step plus add in all the new resources. It seems we will need to eliminate some core curriculum lessons in order to integrate some new ones. Do you have suggestions?
Yeah. So if you were doing all of second step and all of CPU and all of BPU and the community rebuilding unit, that will be more lessons than you have time in the year for. So that's part of what our revised scope and sequence will do. So I'm going to talk about this revised scope and sequence that we're going to be putting out. Second step is an evidence-based program, and it's evidence-based assumes you're doing the program in order the way it's laid out. So the minute you step away from that, whether you're doing your own modifications or you're using our revised scope and sequence, you are stepping away from that evidence base, and it is no longer an evidence-based program once you do that. Because it takes to get evidence-based means you do an RCT, you spend years studying it, and you look at the effects of it, done in a particular way. But we realize that these are unique times, and unique times require us to think outside the box for that. So that's why we're going to have the revised scope and sequence, which is in a sense going to sort of say what is most important at this point for students right now. And when you see that revised scope and sequence, you can kind of think about it and say, what do I need to do? What is most important for my students? And I think also encourage you that kind of with that in mind, that you're stepping away from the evidence from the RCT that proved that second step works. To trust yourself. You know your students far better than we do. If you feel like you need to modify things, if you feel like things that are more important for your students now than other things, and there's things that need to be cut in order to fit time, then do so. Because you are the expert on your students, and you should trust yourself in that. With the guidance of the revised scope of sequence that we're putting out.
When will that be, Matt, that we'll have that scope and sequence?
We'll have that August 1st. So that'll be included in the remote and the hybrid learning guides. We'll have that revised
so
scope
they
and
won't
sequence.
get that ahead of time, but it will come out at the same time to help guide that as they start school. Okay, great. One last one, I think, just because you are an expert really in the middle school implementation. The question is, what is the best practice to administer secondary SEL? Is there a recommended period, i.e. PE or science, or should instruction be infused in every course?
Well, I think instruction should be infused in every course. I think that's the go-to thing for social emotional learning. It's really clear in the research. Now, what does that mean? That can be a matter of having a common language established and having elements of that show up in everywhere. So it doesn't necessarily mean doing second step lessons in every course. And tell you, as far as like those core lessons that you do, I am just a huge proponent of an advisory period. That a time where students can set aside where students can feel comfortable like this. This is a time where we can talk about ourselves. It's not science class, but now we're going to do a second step lesson. It is the time where we're going to really focus on ourselves and talk about ourselves and talk about social emotional needs. And advisories are a great place for that to happen. Not just because it sets aside the time for the lesson, but also because that role of that advisor, that when you're trying to kind of build that culture of trust that it takes to kind of do this work, that it can sometimes be difficult with an academic class where students come in and they go, I'm in science class. I'm in PE class. This should be science and PE. And that person up there doing the lesson, that's my science teacher, my PE teacher. And my feelings about science and PE color my feelings about that science teacher or that PE teacher. When you have an advisory program, that advisor's their job right there is not to teach. Their job there is to be the advocate of the student, to be that adult that cares about the student. And when you create that, and that relationship is very different from being the person who is there to get them to learn a thing. And that relationship is really important. So to the extent of where I'd say to put it, I would say put it in advisory, which was not one of the things you asked. You asked about where to put it in an academic class.
I fully agree with you, Matt. And I know it's not always possible, but like you said, I think as we start the school year this year, we're going to be stepping away from the traditional ways we've always done things. And, that's us at CFC, and it's also all of our, partners and program users out there. So, we are also available to kind of talk through some of that planning. So you can see our client support team here, but we also have implementation support, and we have folks like me that are working at district level. So if something, you would like to kind of talk through that a little bit, just call the 1-800 number there and they'll help get you connected to the right person. That way we can kind of work through what might be the best way to handle that. Maybe you can do an advisory period that you never had done before, but maybe now's the time to bring that out and do that in some creative way. So I think that's all the questions we'll take for you, Matt. I will just reinforce for folks a couple of things. One is that we do have a lot of resources on the COVID-19 support page. We have recorded lessons. This came up. We have recorded lessons for the emotion management units for pre-K to grade 5. Those are people like me actually teaching those lessons and adapting them for home virtual presentation. And those are going to be available till the end of the year also, so the end of December. So originally we were only keeping things till June 30, but we have created those lessons. We've also allowed for you to video yourself and post that on your learning management system, or to use that those recordings however you see fit through the end of the year also. So I hope that kind of eases your mind, some of you who were asking when that stuff would go away. So hopefully that helps. I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to everyone for coming today. This is really our pleasure. It's just so wonderful to see really these hundreds of people that joined us today to learn more about these supports and to come together really as a community around Second Step. We appreciate you more than you know. So thank you, everyone. Please stay safe and healthy. And we look forward to seeing you on another webinar here in the near future. Would you like to say goodbye, Matt?
I would like to say goodbye. Thank you so much for coming out. I know you all are doing, you did incredible work in the fall and in the spring, and you're prepping to do incredible work in the new school year. And it's a privilege for me to be able to do what I can to support that work. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.